So let me talk about what our agenda is today. So I want to talk about the characteristics of change, and we're going to talk about the dynamics of change, both personal as well as organizational. We'll talk about the phases of the transition process. So we want to look at endings. We're going to look at that space in between that I'm going to call the neutral zone, new beginnings, and then we're just going to, through this, we're going to take some time at the end for each one of you to do some personal planning based on what we've talked about today. Okay, so let's start by looking at the characteristics of change. And the way I'd like to do this is by having you look at, to start with, some major life changes that most adults go through. So you can add to this list too, I just put some. So new job, marriage, I was thinking about children coming, children going, children coming, children going, children coming, I don't know, it's like they go and then, I don't know, they seem to come back again. Divorce, illness in the family or illness that we go through ourselves, death, job change, relocation, career change, retirement. Oh, that's not a very popular word anymore, but doing something different. Organizational change is part of that whole list. So when we look at this list, it actually indicates some of the characteristics that we're going to see in change. So first characteristic is that change is both positive. It's like when you look at some of these changes, which ones would be seen as positive?
Marriage.
Which one?
Marriage.
Marriage. What else?
Children.
Children going, children. Okay. So we can look and we can see that there's certainly some here that people are going to be excited about. And then there's some other changes here that we might consider more negative. Like what?
Death.
Death, illness in the family. And then there's ones that if you look at, they have elements of both positive and negative in them at the same time. So what do you see there? Divorce. Yeah. So it's one of those things that aspects of it are not any fun. And at the same time, there's aspects of that as we go through the transition that become very positive. So that's one of the things that we see. Now, there's another characteristic here of change that is not always quite so evident, and that is that change is often either perceived as imposed or chosen. And that's an important kind of a distinction to make, because when change is chosen, when we decide that we want to do it, what do we tend to focus on? We tend to focus on the positive things when change is chosen. What about when change is imposed?
Negative.
Yeah, we tend to focus on the negative. And so imposed change almost immediately, there's a sense of loss that comes with it. There's a sense of victimhood at being at the effect of someone or something else. And when it's imposed change, we focus much more on what the negative is, on what the losses are. So I want you to just think about this for a moment. Organizational change, imposed or chosen? Interestingly, that's often what our experience is that it feels like organizational change is imposed. Now, I'm not saying that's true, but I'm saying that for many people that's what our experience is going to be. Okay. Now, when we look at change, we'll also see that there's a characteristic shape that change goes through. And we've already, all I have to do was show you the agenda so we can begin to see what that characteristic of change is. So it starts with endings. It's marked by loss. And then we go through a period. This is the most painful part, but then we go through a period that I'm calling the neutral zone. And it's a time where we're neither in the old world nor are we in the new world. It's that space in between. And as we go through the neutral zone, we then come through and we begin to make new beginnings. Now, people don't go through this process in a smooth way. We'll go through it in various places, and sometimes it looks like we're moving to one part of the transition process, and the next thing you know, we're back in a different phase again. So there certainly is a shape, but how people go through it is going to vary. How many of you recognize this in your own life? Most of you, have you experienced, have you seen this? Yeah. Now, there's one other thing I want to talk about. Pretty normal that as there's a lot of change in our lives, that organizational change will produce personal stress for people. It's one of the things that people experience. Now, how people experience that change is often a matter of personal perspective. And I bet you've noticed this, that there are different people in the organization who are experiencing change differently. So what are the things that influence how people experience change? Any of you have any ideas here? Yeah.
Their outlook on life, kind of.
Sure. So their outlook in life. And often this has to do with something to do with our personal orientation. So some people are future focused, some people are more focused in the present, some people focus on relationships, some people focus more on task. So we begin to see that there's a different orientation that produces a different kind of a way that we experience change. What else will affect this?
I think the impact that the change is going to have on them personally.
Right. So the impact that the change will have on us personally, and also on how we look at that situation. Does that make sense?
I think it just depends again, like the impact.
Yeah, yeah. So looking at the impact it has on the person.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's one other thing I'd like you to think about, that life phase and career phase is going to actually affect people, the change will affect people differently. So in many, many years that I've worked with people going through organizational change, one of the things that I can tell you is that the further along we are in our career, often the harder these organizational changes are for people to go through. Why is that? What do you think?
I'm just invested so much.
Well, yeah, we get to be 40 or 50 or 60, and we've invested a lot in the organization and our career, and all of a sudden it can look like, now what? Where do I go next? Whereas my own experience is that the younger career people, you know what? There's lots and lots of time and lots more opportunities for us. Gender, interestingly, has an impact on how we go through change. And guys, I'm sorry to say this, but women tend to navigate change. Now, it may not look like it, but women navigate change in many ways more easily than men. And this is due to primarily one factor, and that is that women tend to have a broader and a deeper number of relationships, and they use those relationships effectively to help them go through change. So there's a lesson in that. There's a lesson to all of us about the importance of having a personal support system that is both wide as well as one that's deep in terms of the things that we're able to talk to each other about. Now, one other thing. What's been our experience with change in the past? Now, I know that for some people, change has always been accompanied, it's come with crisis. Now, I'm curious, for how many of you, crisis and change have come together? If you're willing to just show me a show of hands. Anybody here where change has been related to crisis, there's something really wrong? No? Yeah? I'd have to raise my hand for that as well. that, you know, I would really have to say in my life that particularly in my younger years, that change in our family resulted from crisis. So you have to know that one of the reasons I like to do this work is because it helps me. You know, if you want to get good at something, teach it to other people. Now, for other people, change has always been about opportunity, about, you know, there's something new and wonderful. For how many of you has that been more your experience? Yeah. So look at this. So we look and we see that even in a group this size, that we're going to have different perspectives, and our past history is going to impact how we experience change. All right, so let me now look. I'm going to move forward, and I'm going to look at some of the one of the big differences between change and transition. So this is a very, very important distinction for us to make. Change is an event. It can happen very, very quickly, and it begins with something new. So this is much like someone announces that something is going to happen, and at that moment, the change is already there. Now, transition is different. Transition is a process. It starts with an ending. It doesn't start with something new. It goes on inside of the person, and it tends to take much, much longer than what the change takes. Now, I want you to see something here. Unless individuals make the change, make the transition, the change does not happen. And we know in organizational change that having people who are able to go through transitions really is what determines in many ways whether or not change is going to be effective in the organization. Okay, here's some dynamics of change, both they're individuals. Let's look at these. So first of all, no matter how exciting the change is, expect a sense of loss. Okay, what's the loss with having a new baby? Freedom, sleep. Now, I just want to say that I was very surprised. Exciting change. My first grandchild was born. Oh my goodness, like I was over the moon excited about this. And next thing I knew, I was experiencing a little loss. My daughter didn't have any time for me anymore. It was like, hey, what happened to our relationship? And that's been an interesting kind of a transition for me as a mother to experience that. What's the loss if you become rich and famous? Privacy. Don't know who your friends are anymore. What's the loss with a promotion?
Lack of responsibility, maybe? Lack of responsibility.
Lack of responsibility with a promotion?
Yeah, well, no, the loss of...
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So yes, a loss of freedom.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. So all of a sudden you have all this other work that you need to do. What's the other loss with a promotion?
Changes the dynamics of your relationship with your former coworkers.
Right. So it changes those dynamics with our former coworkers. So no matter how exciting the change is, expect that sense of loss. I want to tell you a story here. One of my friends, we had our children on different time frames. So I had my children when I was younger, and she had her first child when she was 35 years old. And we were all pretty excited about this. And I came to see her about a week, 10 days after the baby was born. And I walked in the door, and she was standing there with this. She looked at me and she said to me, "Donalda, why didn't you tell me it was going to be like this?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "I'm exhausted all the time. This baby cries." She said, "I never get any time for myself." This was a person who was used to a huge amount of personal freedom. And I said to her, "I'm not sure you would have listened if I had told you." But it was one of those things that, you know, always, when I think about that, always touches me. No matter how competent people are, expect that there's going to be a sense of confusion and ambiguity. So I'd just like you to think about something. You get hired for a job in a new organization because you're competent, because you know what you're doing. Tell me, though, what that first week, 3 months of work is like.
Sometimes terrifying.
Sometimes terrifying. Is there confusion and ambiguity? So this has nothing to do with how competent we are. It has everything to do with being in transition. Expect the loss and ambiguity to lead to a deterioration of trust and a sense of self-preservation. So you talked about this. Suddenly people want their accomplishments to be seen by other people. Suddenly it becomes, oh, this is mine. Yeah, I need to make sure that I protect this little bit of territory that I have. Loss of trust, you talked about that. Because we don't know what's going to happen. So those are the personal dynamics. So let's look at the organizational dynamics of change. So communications deteriorate. Why do communications deteriorate? Anybody?
Scared if you keep communicating that people will find more opportunities for change.
So afraid if you communicate, people will find more opportunities for change. If you tell them what's going on, oh my God, they might want to change that as well. Why else? Why else do communications deteriorate?
What is the loss of trust?
Loss of trust. And remember that one of the things that also happens is the structures that supported the communication will often begin to break down. Productivity suffers. There can often be a drop in productivity that people will lose momentum. Loss of team play, actually these next two, loss of team play and power and turf struggles, those are all about what's going to happen to me. And so this, and then it shows up in the organization in this way. When we lose the sense of team play, we also lose sight of our goals. With the power and turf struggles, it's pretty easy to lose sight of what's going on with our customers, with our stakeholders. Morale goes down. We can lose commitment. Bailouts occur. You talked about this. So you can lose good people during these times. So here's what I want you to see. Remember that these are normal, natural phases that organizations go through when there's a lot of change going on. This is not unusual. So my own experience is that the better I understand this, both personally, myself, as well as I'm able to look at organizations, then you know what? It reduces that sense of, oh my God, what's going on here? Something's wrong. No, something's not wrong. The organization and the people in the organization are simply going through transition. Have you seen this stuff? Yeah, you've said it. You said it right at the beginning. It's pretty much what you identified. See how smart you are? You already, I don't know why we're doing this session. You already knew all this. All right. So here's some premises about change. Or here's one in particular. All change, even the most longed for, have their melancholy. For what we leave behind is a part of us. We must die to one life before we can enter into another. So if you think about that, before I can learn something new, and I know this is different, often to learn something new, I need to let go of what I knew in the past. Often to create a new identity for myself, I need to let go of the identity that I used to have. In order to move into a new life, I need to first of all let go of parts of the life that I had. So very, very normal kind of a process. Now, here's the transition process, and I'm going to talk about this in terms of a relocation. So I want to tell you what happened to me, and I think that all of you are going to be able to experience this. So after living almost my whole life in Medicine Hat, I'd lived there really my whole life, my husband and I decided that we were going to move to Calgary. And I remember, we had good reasons for moving, and I remember the first part of that conversation. It was like, geez, I'm really going to miss this place. I'm really going to miss my friends. You know, it's so easy to get around here. It just takes us 5 minutes to drive to any place. Oh, gosh, I really loved that job that I had. I wonder who's going to take over that. Why did we decide to do this in the first place? Do you remember? Is this really a good idea? You know, and I remember these kinds of conversations, and they would pop up here and there. My youngest daughter, one day, as we were going somewhere, she was sitting in the back seat of the car, and she said to my husband and I, "How come we have to move? Do you realize that you're ruining my life?" Now, you know, talk about guilt. Both my husband and I were, all right, yeah, okay, we are ruining your, and boy, for her, that was really her experience. So as we began to move, and we arrived in Calgary, and I'm sure all of you can relate to this, nothing was automatic. I needed to think about absolutely everything that I was doing. Okay, so how do I get to work in the morning? All of a sudden I'm driving in a whole different city with all this traffic. Where's the dry cleaners? How am I going to find a doctor? New job, how am I going to make my way around this organization? And what I noticed was that period of that neutral zone was absolutely exhausting. I would go home every night, and I saw this with my family as well, we were exhausted because we had to think through everything. And then I noticed that there was a subtle shift that happened over time. We got the house arranged. We got the pictures hung. And I knew that our transition was complete when we went to Medicine Hat for Christmas. And it actually took us about 18 months. We went to Medicine Hat for Christmas to be with our family. And after 3 days, I said to my husband, "Let's go home." And it came out of my mouth. I realized that that was the first time that I had called Calgary my home. And I bet, can you relate to this? Yeah, very much how this transition process looks. Now, I'd like to just show you something here. This is on purpose, because one of the things that happens is that during the neutral zone, during this phase here, productivity will go down. Now, here's how we would like it to look. We would like to be able to switch ourselves off and on like you can a switch. You know, you just turn the lights off, turn the lights off. So here's what we like. We like to go like this, and then all of a sudden go like that. Because that's what many changes are meant to produce. More effectiveness, more productivity, being able to deal with things in that way. It doesn't happen that way. And when we expect it to happen that way, we get real disappointed. So expect that there's going to be this, you're not going to always be as productive and as focused as what you ordinarily are. Here's what I'd like you to do as I'm talking about this. I'd like you to think about your particular situation, about the changes, and think about the changes that you have been going through over the last while. Now, I want to just emphasize something here, that I also recognize that at the same time that the organization has been going through changes, each one of you have also been going through changes in your own life. Your life has not been on hold. I mean, things still continue to happen for you. And one of the things that results in is that sometimes we get what's called some resonance, where all of the changes that are happening in our whole life begin to impact each other. And so it becomes actually louder and it becomes more difficult for us. So sometimes that may be happening for people who are working with you or who are around you, and it really helps if we can get a sense of that, of understanding of that. Okay, so as I go through these, I'd just like you to check some of these off. Change requires that things end. That's the beginning. And with endings, we experience loss. So first one is attachment. So this is loss of peer relationships, mentorship, trusted subordinates, group membership. That feeling of us. Structure. So time schedules, responsibilities, familiar procedures, our priorities, the things that we thought were really important. And then there's often people will lose a sense of the future. So dreams that we had for our lives, plans that we had for the future, where we thought we were going with our career. Now, this next one is interesting. We tend not to think of ourselves as being, bound by turf, and yet people are very, very, very much turf bound. So, physical space. Hey, that's my space. Whose chair are you sitting on? If you think about it, we sit on a chair and we go, oh, that's my chair. Oh, what do you mean? You're just sitting on it. It's interesting to have people do things like change spaces and have somebody sit in the chair that somebody else was sitting in a workshop. The person who was on that chair will come in and say, you're sitting in my spot. Yeah, we're pretty territorial. So around things like physical space, but in organizations about our expertise and about our areas of responsibility. Meaning, so how things added up, how things made sense. Control. And here it's often a loss of a sense of ability to influence, being listened to, participating in decisions. There may be others, but loss of the beliefs, things that we believed were true about ourselves, about other people, about the organization, about the way the way life was going to be. So as we talked about those, have any of you experienced or are experiencing any of those losses? Just give me a little sense. Anybody experience a loss of attachment? Just raise your hand. Yeah? Has anybody experienced a loss of structure? Anybody experienced just the sense of where am I going? That sense of loss of future? Right? Anybody experienced a loss of your expertise, your responsibility? See some head shaking here? Anybody just thought, I don't get it. Like how does all this fit? How does it fit together? Anybody experienced that? Anybody experienced a loss of control, being listened to? Feeling like you've been included in decisions? Yeah? And by the way, the consultants who work with you, oh, that would be me. We also experience too close to the organization for this not to impact me as well. So I look at this list and I see this as well. Anybody realize that a belief that you had about yourself or the organization doesn't seem like it's true anymore? Yeah. So we can all identify some of the losses that we experience. And remember that with loss comes grieving.